So now we move into the non-combat move phase. All of the units that moved during combat, with the exception of the planes, cannot move. They've already done their move as part of the combat move. But all other units which did not move, plus the planes, can now move in the non-combat movement phase to set up for the next turn. So first let's deal with the planes, moving them so they can land back in friendly territories. Planes can be a little tricky because when you have a lot of them, like we did with Germany here, you have to remember where they came from. Another thing I forgot to mention are the air bases. When a plane takes off from a territory containing an air base, it gains one extra movement point. So these tactical bombers that came from Western Germany, where there was an air base, actually have 5 movement points now instead of the normal 4. They only moved 1 in the invasion of France, so they have 4 movement points left because they took off from an air base. So if they wanted to, they could move as many as 1, 2, 3, 4 and land over in Romania. But I'm thinking that they will assist in the invasion of the United Kingdom later on, so we'll just use one of those 4 remaining movement points to land them in Holland, Belgium. The fighter in France that came from Holland, Belgium did not have an air base, so the fighter only has 3 movement points left to land. But again, he will just use one of those to land back in Holland, Belgium. The bomber and the 2 fighters in this sea zone will do the same and land in Holland, Belgium. This fighter took off from Norway. Norway does not have an air base, so he only has 2 movement points left to land. But he can also join the rest of the Luftwaffe in Holland, Belgium. So all my planes have now landed safely in friendly territory. The other part of non-combat movement is your other land units that did not move during combat movement. So these infantry and this artillery in Greater Southern Germany each have a movement point of 1. So they can move into friendly territory, Western Germany, during the non-combat movement phase. These 3 tanks each have a movement point of 2. So this tank could go 1, 2. This tank could go 1, 2. And this tank could go 1, 2. So that is non-combat. Now we move on to the next phase, which is place new units. So in the place new units phase, you're going to take the units that you bought in your first phase, the purchase new units phase, and place them on the game board for future turns. These units can only be placed in territories that have industrial complexes. Industrial complexes are the facilities that have a 3 or a 10 on them. The numbers represent the maximum number of units that you can place in that territory. Remember I said that these industrial complexes and all the facilities can become damaged throughout the game. If an industrial complex is damaged, it will have a number of chips under it. So if this number 3 industrial complex had a chip under it, its number would now be 2. So instead of having a maximum of 3, it now has a maximum of 2 units that can be placed in this territory. So here are the units I bought at the first part of my turn. I bought 2 tanks, 2 infantry, and a fighter. That's 5 units. Notice I couldn't place them all in this territory because of the maximum 3 industrial complex. I could place them all in Western Germany with a 10 industrial complex. And that is what I'll decide to do. Notice I now have a pretty good number of land units in Western Germany ready to be transported over to the United Kingdom, but I only have 1 transport. I didn't have an opportunity in the combat phase to show you how transports work, but transports are used to transport land units across sea zones to other land units. Transports can carry 1 infantry and 1 other land unit. So the way this could work in the next turn is that this transport could load up this infantry and let's say a tank. The transport can move 2 spaces, so the transport could move 1, 2, carrying that infantry and tank, and then unload them for an invasion of the United Kingdom in a future turn. We can't do that now because the combat phase is over, but that could be done in a future turn assuming these seas remain open. Like I was saying, I have a large number of land units here, but I only have 1 transport unit. So maybe what I should have done at the beginning of my phase was buy more transport units. But I didn't know how these conflicts would turn out. So that's part of the decision-making process you have to think about at the beginning of your turn when you're buying new units is chancing how these combat situations are going to come out. If I had bought transport units and not these other units, and the invasion of France failed, it might not have been a good idea to buy all those transports. Now I move into the final phase of Germany's turn, which is the collect income phase. One thing I forgot to mention is that when Germany took the territory of France with that invasion, it captured the capital territory of the French player. So the German player would immediately receive all of France's currently held IPCs. France started out the game with 17 IPCs, and it hasn't come around to France's turn yet, so Germany immediately gets 17 IPCs. Now you look at the national production chart and see where your marker is. Germany's marker is on 34, so that's your base number for the collect income phase. It's possible that you could add to or subtract values from that number. First, what could subtract from that number? Convoy disruptions are what can subtract from that number. To find convoy disruptions, you look around the board and you find territories that you currently control that have a convoy symbol on a C-zone adjacent to that territory. The only such territory for Germany right now is Norway. There aren't currently any enemy ships in this C-zone with the convoy symbol on it, so Germany's not going to have any convoy disruptions from this C-zone. But for example purposes, let's assume that the UK had a ship in this C-zone. This ship would cause convoy disruptions to Germany and subtract from the IPCs that you're going to get for this turn. Surface ships subtract 1 and submarines subtract 2. So if it were the case that there were this surface ship here and 2 submarines, that would potentially subtract 2, 4, 5, but the maximum here is 3, so it would only subtract 3. But the UK does not have any ships in this zone or any other sea zones adjacent to currently German-controlled territory, so there are no convoy disruption subtractions for Germany. Now what can add to your income? Each country is going to have a number of national objectives during the game. And these national objectives are going to be different in the theater level game versus the global game. In the European game, Germany has 4 national objectives, but the only one I currently meet is if Germany controls both Denmark and Norway while Sweden is neutral or Axis controlled. These conditions are met, and this represents delivery of Swedish iron ore, and that gives me a 5 IPC bonus income. So you look at your level on the national production chart, and that number is your base. So for Germany it's 34. Subtract any convoy disruptions. Germany doesn't have any of that, so it's 34 minus 0, plus your national objective bonus. And I get plus 5 for that national objective bonus that I met. So Germany will get 34 minus 0 plus 5, or 39 IPCs in the collect income phase of this round. So Germany now has its unspent IPCs from the first part of my turn, plus the 17 IPCs from capturing the capital of France, plus the 39 income from my base national production level, and my convoy disruptions and my national objectives. So this concludes Germany's turn, and now it is the Soviet Union's turn. So the Soviet Union will go through the same phases on their turn. One thing I didn't get to talk about or show you an example of during my example German turn was the strategic bombing raids. I mentioned a couple of times that facilities in the game can become damaged, and strategic bombing raids is the way that facilities become damaged. So I thought it would be good to show an example of a strategic bombing raid and how that would go. So let's assume it's Germany's turn again, and Germany wants to reduce the production capabilities of this major industrial complex in the United Kingdom. So the German player can do that through a strategic bombing raid. You conduct the strategic bombing raid with your strategic bombers. So this bomber could fly from Holland, Belgium, and go 1, 2, and say that they're going to strategically bomb that industrial complex. These UK fighters are going to be able to help defend against that attack, so the Germans can also bring in fighters to serve as escorts in a strategic bombing raid. So the German player may decide to bring in these two fighters in Holland, Belgium as escorts. These units are moved during the combat movement phase, and then the strategic bombing raid is conducted as the first part in the conduct combat phase. So let's move the units involved in the strategic bombing raid to the combat strip and show you how that would go. So here's the strategic bombing raid. We have the German strategic bomber attempting to raid the major industrial complex. The bomber is accompanied by these two German fighter escorts. The 3 United Kingdom fighters have chosen to take part in defending against this strategic bombing raid. Note that all of these units involved and committed to the strategic bombing raid attack cannot be used in other battles in this turn. So the first thing that's going to go on is the fighters are going to fight. The fighters in a strategic bombing raid attack don't attack and defend at their usual values. Instead, they attack at 1 and defend at 2. The fighter attack is going to last for 1 round. So the 2 German fighters fire, so rolling 2 dice at 1, and they miss. Now the 3 United Kingdom fighters will defend at 2. So I roll 3 at 2, and I score 1 hit. Now the German player can choose either one of the 2 fighters or the strategic bomber. I want to continue with the strategic bombing raid, so I'm going to choose a fighter to be destroyed. So the fighter is dead and out of the game. The fighter escorts and interceptors battle is over, so these return to the game board. Now the major industrial complex has a built-in anti-aircraft gun. So at this point that anti-aircraft gun fires. It fires at 1. So you roll 1 at 1. So the anti-aircraft gun misses. If it were to hit, then the bomber would be taken as a casualty, removed from the game, and you wouldn't be able to complete the strategic bombing raid. But in this case it missed, so now and only now can the bomber go ahead with its strategic bombing raid on the industrial complex. So you roll 1 die, and that is the amount of damage caused to the industrial complex by the strategic bombing raid. In this case I caused 5 points of damage. So you would place 1 red 5 chip or 5 gray chips under the industrial complex and move it back to the game board. So this major industrial complex has now been damaged and is reduced to 5 production points. So this major industrial complex can now only deploy 5 units instead of 10. A major industrial complex can't receive more than 20 total damage points. Minor industrial complexes can't receive more than 6 total damages. Air bases and naval bases also can't receive more than 6 total damage. So any damage done exceeding these limits is just not applied. This damage can be repaired by the UK player as part of their first phase. By paying 5 IPCs, they can remove the damage done to this major industrial complex. Also wanted to show you an example of blitzing. Notice that I have an Italian tank here in Libya, and the territories of Tunisia and Algeria, French territories, are not currently occupied by any forces. The tank has 2 movement points. On the Italian combat movement phase, the Italians could choose to take this tank and move it 1-2, blitzing through Tunisia. The Italians would capture both Tunisia and Algeria and place a control marker on both territories. The Italians' national production level would also go up by 2, the sum of the 2 numbers in the circles in the 2 territories, and the French national production level would go down by 2. If there were a French unit here in Tunisia, the Italian tank cannot blitz through. You must stop once you encounter enemy units.